You've been told your whole life that success looks a certain way, loud, busy, surrounded by people, always somewhere to be. So what does it mean when the smartest person you know would rather spend Friday night alone with their thoughts than at a party pretending to care about small talk? It turns out it might mean everything. Introvert psychology has been quietly dismantling the myth that social equals superior, and the findings are impossible to ignore. Here's the uncomfortable truth that no one says out loud. People who love staying home aren't missing out. In many cases, they're re-opting into something that the constantly busy, chronically overstimulated world has almost entirely lost access to depth. The psychology of introverts reveals minds that are more reflective, more selective, and often more emotionally intelligent than their extroverted counterparts. This isn't about being antisocial. This is about understanding how certain brains are wired to find meaning, and why for those brains, home isn't a hiding place. It is a laboratory. What if staying home isn't laziness but psychological self-protection? Most people assume that someone who prefers the couch over a crowded bar must have something wrong with them, but the science of introvert psychology tells a very different story. Choosing solitude isn't a flaw. For millions of people, it's the most intelligent decision their brain makes every single day. The truth is, the psychology of introverts reveals a mind that operates on a different frequency, not a broken one. These are people who feel the world more intensely, process it more deeply, and need quiet the way the rest of us need air. Before we label someone antisocial, it is worth asking, what if they're not running away from life, but running towards something far more meaningful? You've probably heard someone say, "I am drained after a party," and brushed it off as an excuse. But social battery explained through neuroscience shows it is far from dramatic. Introverts literally process social interactions through a longer, more energy-intensive neural pathway than extroverts do. The introvert brain responds to external stimulation the way a phone with a smaller battery responds to heavy apps. It works, but it depletes faster. And it is not just about crowds. Overstimulation explained through sensory research shows that even background noise, fluorescent lights, or too many conversations happening at once can push a sensitive nervous system toward overload. This isn't a weakness, it is a brain that's highly tuned, picking up signals others simply miss. The question isn't why some people need to recharge alone. It is why we ever expected everyone to run on the same settings. There is a reason the moment you close your front door behind you, something in your chest loosens. Why staying home feels safe isn't just poetic, it is psychological. Home is one of the few environments where you control the noise level, the lighting, the people, and the pace. For a mind wired towards social anxiety psychology, that kind of control isn't a luxury. It's a survival. Comfort zone psychology tells us that humans naturally seek environments where threat levels are low and predictability is high, and for highly sensitive people, home checks every box. It is not about fear of the outside world. It is about having a psychological base camp, a place where the nervous system can finally stop bracing for impact. And when you understand that, I'd rather stay in tonight stop sounding like an excuse and start sounding like wisdom. Some people walk into a room and notice the temperature, the tension between two people in the corner, the song playing too loud, and the slight impatience in someone's voice all at once. This is the reality of highly sensitive people, a trait identified by psychologist Elaine Aron that affects roughly 15 to 20 of the population. It's not overthinking for the sake of it. It is a nervous system that was built to process everything more deeply, more completely, and more intensely than average. The challenge is that human behavior psychology rarely makes space for this kind of depth. When you feel social energy like a physical weight, when a harsh tone lingers in your mind for hours, when a crowded mall feels genuinely overwhelming, the world starts to seem like it was designed for someone else. But here, as what S rarely said, that same sensitivity that exhausts you in noisy environments is the exact thing that makes you extraordinarily perceptive, empathetic, and self-aware. And that's where it gets really interesting. Modern life didn't just get busier, it got louder, faster, and relentlessly performative. Between the constant ping of notifications, the unspoken pressure to always seem available, and the exhausting ritual of small talk that goes nowhere, mental exhaustion from people has reached levels previous generations simply didn't face. And for someone already running on a sensitive nervous system, the weight of it all isn't just tiring it's genuinely depleting in ways that are hard to explain to someone who doesn't feel it. Then there's the cultural script that says productivity means visibility, show up, network, be seen, be loud. The psychology of solitude gets no airtime in a world that rewards extroversion at every turn. Introverts aren't struggling because they were weak. They were struggling because they were trying to operate in a system that was never designed with their wiring in mind. And the more they try to keep up, the more they find themselves fantasizing about one thing going home and finally exhaling. At some point, almost every introvert has heard it. You need to get out more. Said with good intentions, maybe, but landing like a quiet accusation that something about them needs fixing. The truth is, society has spent decades building a blueprint for success that looks suspiciously like extroversion open offices, networking events, group brainstorming, the loudest voice in the room winning the argument. Why some people avoid socializing rarely gets a fair explanation, because the dominant culture simply assumes that wanting to be alone must mean something is wrong. What makes it harder is the confusion between introversion and sadness. Loneliness psychology and introversion are not the same thing, but they get collapsed into one story all the time. A quiet person at a party isn't necessarily suffering. A person who declines the invitation isn't necessarily depressed. They may simply be someone whose inner world is rich enough that they don't need constant external input to feel alive. The misunderstanding doesn't make them broken. It just makes them exhausted in a different way. There's a distinction that changes everything once you truly understand it. Being alone and feeling lonely are not the same experience. Loneliness psychology describes a painful sense of disconnection, the ache of wanting connection and not having it. Solitude, on the other hand, is a conscious choice, a space you enter willingly and leave feeling more like yourself than when you arrived. The psychology of solitude frames it not as absence, but as presence, full, intentional presence with your own mind. For introverts and people who love staying home, time alone isn't a consolation prize for a failed social life. It's the primary way the nervous system recovers, resets, and rebuilds. Think of it like sleep. No one calls you antisocial for needing 8 hours. Mental and emotional restoration through solitude works by the same logic. The problem isn't that some people need more of it. The problem is that we never taught anyone the difference between retreating to heal and retreating to hide. There's a particular kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't dominate conversations or fill silences with noise. It watches, absorbs, and connects dots that louder minds tend to skip over. Quiet people. Psychology reveals something fascinating. The same internal orientation that makes socializing exhausting is the very thing that fuels extraordinary observation, creative depth, and emotional precision. While others are performing, quiet people are paying attention, and that attention compounds into insight over time. Emotional intelligence introverts possess often goes unrecognized precisely because it doesn't look like the conventional markers of leadership or charisma. But research consistently shows that introverts tend to think before speaking, listen more carefully, and process ethical and emotional complexity with unusual depth. Thinkers like Einstein, Darwin, and Kafka weren't quiet. Despite their brilliance, they were brilliant in part because of their quiet. The world tends to reward the loudest voice in the room, but history tends to remember the most thoughtful one. Walk into a busy shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon as a highly sensitive person, and something almost immediate happens. The brain shifts into a kind of high alert mode. scanning exits, tracking conversations, registering every visual and auditory input simultaneously. Overstimulation, explained through neuroscience, shows that this isn't paranoia or weakness. It's a nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, just at a much higher intensity than the average person experiences. The introvert brain in a crowded space isn't relaxing, it's working overtime. This is where social anxiety psychology and introversion often get tangled together, because the end result can look identical from the outside: someone who avoids crowds, leaves early, or never shows up at all. But the mechanism is different. It does not always fear driving the exit. Sometimes it's simply the math: too many inputs, too little bandwidth, and a brain that has been quietly analyzing every face, every tone, and every shift in energy since the moment it walked through the door. Exhaustion in that context isn't a mood. It is a completely logical outcome. Here's where the conversation has to get honest, because there's a line, and it matters. Staying home to recharge is self-awareness. Staying home to avoid every uncomfortable feeling that life might bring is something else entirely. Comfort zone psychology draws a clear distinction between rest and retreat, between boundaries and walls. When the couch stops being a place of recovery and starts being a place of hiding, the psychology of isolation begins to work against the very person it was meant to protect. Homebody psychology becomes a trap the moment solitude stops being a choice and starts being the only option that feels tolerable. Social fear quietly expands to fill whatever space you give it. Skip one gathering, then two, then stop getting invited altogether, and suddenly the world feels smaller than it should. This isn't a moral failing, it's a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. The goal was never to eliminate the outside world. It was to engage with it on your own terms, with enough inner stability that it doesn't consume you. And that balance? That's what we need to talk about next. Here's something that reframes the whole conversation. Introverts don't stay home because they were afraid of fun. They stay home because their brain finds a genuinely different set of experiences rewarding. Dopamine and solitude research shows that introverts are actually more sensitive to dopamine, meaning they reach stimulation thresholds faster and with far less external input than extroverts need. A quiet evening with a good book, a creative project, or a deep conversation with one person can produce the same neurological satisfaction that a loud party produces in someone wired differently. This is homebody psychology at its most fundamental level, not a personality quirk, but a neurological reality. The introvert brain isn't broken or underdeveloped. It simply runs on a different reward system. One that finds meaning in depth rather than breadth, in quality rather than quantity, in stillness rather than spectacle. Understanding this doesn't just validate the preference for staying in it, completely dismantles the idea that there is something to fix. The brain is avoiding life. It is selecting very deliberately the version of life that actually makes it feel alive. Some people don't avoid the world because they hate it. They avoid it because they feel it too deeply. And when you understand that, really understand it, the quiet person in the corner stops looking like someone who gave up and starts looking like someone who is paying a kind of attention that most of us have forgotten how to pay. The psychology of isolation, when chosen consciously, isn't emptiness. It is a form of radical presence with the one conversation that never stops, the one happening inside your own mind. Human behavior psychology has spent decades trying to categorize, fix, and extrovert the world into a single acceptable shape. But the science keeps pointing back to the same truth, that depth, sensitivity, and the need for solitude aren't deviations from the human experience. They are, for many people, the most honest expression of it. The world needs its loud voices, yes. But it has always been quietly shaped by the ones who stayed home, thought carefully, and felt everything. So here's the question worth sitting with tonight. When was the last time you gave yourself permission to simply be still without guilt, without justification, without feeling like you owed the world an explanation for choosing quiet. The psychology of solitude isn't a consolation prize for people who couldn't figure out how to be social. It's a sophisticated, neurologically grounded choice made by minds that understand something most people spend their whole lives too busy to learn, that the quality of your inner world determines the quality of everything else. Think about the patterns in your own life. Do you come home from social situations feeling energized or emptied? Do you do your best thinking alone or in a crowd? Do you find more clarity in silence than in noise? These aren't random preferences, they are data points about how your brain is wired, and they deserve to be taken seriously. Emotional intelligence introverts carry isn't loud or performative. It shows up in the patience, the perception, and the depth they bring to everything they do, including the decision to protect their own mental energy. The world will always have somewhere for you to be, something for you to attend, someone waiting for you to show up louder than you actually are. But the most intelligent thing you can do for your mind, your creativity, and your sense of self might just be to close the door, exhale, and remember that some of the most profound thinking in human history happened in quiet rooms. Your quiet room included. If this made you see yourself or someone you love a little differently, then this channel exists exactly for you. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep showing up here, where we take the most fascinating corners of human psychology and make them impossible to look away from. The next video might just change the way you understand your own mind all over again.